Right, good evening everyone, thank you for being here. Great difficulty. Before I do anything tonight and before I start, I'd just like to give my thanks to the Democratic Services, Legal Team and Licensing Team Committee. Keeping going, even during plague and flood. I just want to express my appreciation, I'm sure appreciation on your behalf, for being setting such an admirable example of dedication in the face of such difficulties, and still maintaining a high standard of professionalism and commitment to the job. Well done, everyone in those departments, and to show our appreciation, I'd like to ask all the elected members here to give them all a round of applause and show our appreciation. Thank you very much. I wish there was more of us.
I would just ask for the comments. Choosing
I was going to say that change is not here.
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, do we have an apologies for absence?
Thank you.
Are we happy to approve minutes of the last meeting on Thursday as correct? Items of urgent business. Have we got any items of urgent business?
No.
Declarations of interest. Anyone got anything there? Okay, thank you very much. Right, we're going to my main body. We're going to be doing a lot of talking.
Try and keep it short.
Okay. So I'll hand over to Adam's licensing manager. Application for C.
Just a very, it's just a very quick update report, just to advise you of all the applications that have been received over the period from the 1st of January 2020 through to August 2021. I need to apologise now. Looking at the agenda tonight, it's the first time I've actually seen a compiled agenda, and a large portion of the table that has been there is missing. I've been actually noticed there's no addresses or names of premises associated with any of the applications. What I can do is arrange for that to be circulated by email, so you've got a full sight of everything. All the applications have been granted. It's been a very quiet period during the pandemic, so we haven't seen a great deal of applications, significantly down on the number that we've had.
Oh, John, thank you.
But yeah, so that's the report, and apologies that the printed agenda doesn't contain the right information. I can circulate to everyone. It's only for noting anyway.
Okay. Before I throw out questions, can I just ask one question? Did we have any proposals or applications rejected at all?
No, I mean every application that came through was granted. We only had one temporary event notice that was due to come to committee. We convened the committee, somebody may have been involved in that process, but then the applicant withdrew just before it went to committee. So yeah, everything was granted, everything that was applied for was granted, other than the one that was concealed.
Okay, thank you. But also one plea, when you do send the stuff through on these spreadsheets, in previous times it's been so time we couldn't read it. So
I tried to make it bigger, and hopefully you can read it a little
this
bit, but it's not all there.
it's not all there, so
I'm glad you've explained that, because first time I've looked, and I thought, well, I couldn't quite understand why that was the information, but that makes sense.
I should have looked at the agenda before this evening.
We'll have a rumage later when it does come through. Thank you very much. I'll throw it open to the committee now. Anyone else wish to ask any questions on this particular matter? No? Okay then. Looking at the issues. No recommendations or anything like that?
The recommendations are no.
All right. Do we all note the report?
Yes.
No, yeah, thank you. We'll go on now to the next part of the agenda. And this is the second of licence fees, and once again it's all add-ons. We're supposed to agree the fees and charges set out in Appendix 8 for the year 2022 to 2023 financial year. If you'd like to give us an introductory summary, please.
Certainly. So this report sets out the sort of fee setting process for licensing fees. Just very quickly, there are a number of ways that licence fees are set. Some of them are statutory set, that's by statute by government. Some of them are set, but there's a cap on them, and some of them we can set that's basically on a cost recovery basis. So what this report does is looks at the income that we received in the various areas, and looks at what's sort of the cost of providing the service. Within the whole sort of makeup where we can set fees, if we are making a profit, so if we make more income than it costs us to provide the service, we roll that profit forward, and we can pass that back in future years. On the flip side, if we also make a deficit, so if we don't cover our costs of providing the service, we can also roll that deficit forward and cover that in future years. The proposal for the report this evening is not to make any changes to the current fee level. Appendix A is the proposed schedule, and you'll see whether they're statutory set as an S in one of the columns, or it's discretion D is a fee that we can set. I think the important thing to look at probably is Appendix B, which is it's a summary of the trading account. The areas where it's red, it shows as a negative, but that's just the way it shows on the sheet, is where we're making an area of surplus. So you will see things like the private hire drivers licences, we're currently making a surplus on that. Whereas things like the private hire vehicles and operators, we're making a small deficit. And that's been rolling into year-on-year sort of moving forward. We could change the fee now, and try and adjust that balance somewhat, but we felt because of, especially with the taxi trade predominantly coming out of COVID, they've been significantly hit with income, etc. So we'd like to hold off adjusting the fees to any sort of degree, and to a sort of more thorough review next year, just to give them a little bit of stability from that, and hopefully it will let us sort of settle down with a number of applications that we're receiving as well. We've seen a number of drivers fall away, a number of vehicles fall away, but we are hopeful that there will be some recovery, and that will change the sort of financial position in relation to that. I think that's probably all I want to say. Unless there's this question.
Yes.
How often do you review your fees?
We go through this process annually, so we will keep a trading account so that we can see whether we're making a profit or whether we're making a loss. So we review that annually. Fees like scrap metal and animal licensing, the licence length ranges between 1 and 5 years, so we wouldn't necessarily look to change everything every year. The other thing to do is if we every 3 years have a sort of a good review of it. It tries to keep the fee fairly standard, whereas if we keep pushing it up and down every year, it makes it difficult for staff to know what the fees are as well as the licence holders themselves. But, so we do review it annually, but we're more likely to sort of change it over a longer term, like every 3 years.
When you make profits or you have deficit, does it affect the setting of the fee?
So it will do, and I mean something like the private hire driver, we've got a £12,000 surplus there. I mean this year, the surplus brought forward actually was £17,000 from last year, so it's cost us more this year to run the service than we received in, but we've got that profit there, so it allows us to sort of subsidise previous years, and that's perfectly lawful in the way we can set fees. Obviously, where we're making a deficit, if the deficit grows too big, then we obviously have to sort of increase the fee to sort of try and recover that deficit. But the way it works out is we look at the percentage of time that we spend on each of these types of applications, and we allocate that percentage of the cost. Generally, most of our cost is around staffing and the materials produced with the taxi points, etc. And the provision of the building and
Okay. So recommendations are agree the fees and charges set out in Appendix A, the 2022-23 financial year. Agree. And we're now on to agenda item 7, licensing Licensing manager.
Okay.
This is for the stable licensing policy.
This is the first of the next three reports, all around stables of policy. So under the Licence Act 2003, we are required as an authority to have a statement of licensing policy, which basically sets out our intention to sort of licensing, within the borough. The policy has to be kept under review, and it should be reviewed every 5 years. This policy is now due, or I think it's slightly overdue for review. This report basically has brought the draft policy back following the consultation exercise that's been undertaken. Appendix B are all the consultation responses. That might be the one to sort of move to. If we draw these down some page. Sorry.
Page 89.
What are we looking for?
The Appendix B, a long way down on my screen. Page 89. So Appendix B is the summary of all the responses received. There were a couple of blank responses in relation to that, but that was all of the comments received. The consultation process involved us basically writing to all stakeholders, so that's all licence holders, all trade associations and various other organisations that would have an interest in our policy, all responsible authorities, so that's the police, the fire service, etc. We haven't really made any substantial change to the tone of the policy, etc. It's really just a refresh to incorporate changes in legislation over the period of time. The responses are there. We haven't made any changes to the policy with regard to any of the responses, other than we included the information provided by public health, which is part 5.5 within that table there. So we did make an adjustment to the policy to include some extra information that they wanted us to provide.
Okay. Are we ready for questions?
Yes.
Excellent.
If people do respond to the consultation, do you respond to them? What's happened to their?
Yeah, I mean, so there's an acknowledgement obviously they get when they submit online, and once we've gone through this process, we'll then send them out a link to say that so your comments have been included, have been considered, and this is the final policy.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Chair.
And then
The current policy expired in 2018, so well over 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Why are we only just now looking to review it? And can I ask, in that intervening period, has that exposed the authority to any potential challenging decisions that we've made against an expired policy? Are they challengeable?
The policy, obviously COVID has delayed us in obviously undertaking the policy. We did bring a report last year to sort of the draft policy, then we had to hold off around the consultation because the recommendation was not to sort of consult publicly when COVID first happened. It's my understanding, and legal may be able to assist us with that, that albeit the policy, the date on the policy is expired, because it is our existing policy, the authority stands by that as the policy of the authority. It is a recommendation that it should be reviewed every 5 years. It used to be every 3 years, they changed it to every 5 years. And I don't believe that's exposed us to any risk in relation to that. We've certainly made no decisions of, in amongst that time, but we've hung the decision on something within our policy. So I don't think we've been in risk.
Unless there was a change in the law which directly conflicted with the policy, the fact that it's out of date, in and of itself, wouldn't mean it was subject to additional review. But if it had been, it would have come to me that hasn't been, or it probably you as well. One of us would be on the phone to the other one, so we haven't been challenged.
Okay, Councillor Snell.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask something quite similar to Councillor May's, but however, on the consultation responses, was that it? Is that the sum total of the consultation responses?
It was, yeah. I mean, there were, it says within the report, a number of blank responses. I can't remember the numbers now. right at the back of it. I'll have to flip all the way back up to there. I think you said the details in the book. There was about 3 blank responses. Just people have submitted comments, but they've not actually made any comment in relation to that.
So what kind of, how do we go about eliciting responses? What do we do to put the consultation out there?
I mean, we as I say, we've written to every licence holder. So anyone that's got a licence under the licence section 33 has had a letter inviting them to look at the policy and make comment on the policy. That would include a number of the leading solicitors around the country, or licensing solicitors around the country, but you know, I'm very keen on certificate cases. I think our policy generally, you know, we haven't got a cumulative impact policy or anything like that. So it's a relatively bland policy, but it doesn't make any really bold statements around licensing. We haven't got a great lifetime claim anyway, so it's not unusual to not receive much response to the review of a policy. I know in previous years we've not had much response either. And I know from experience around Essex, South End have undertaken measures and we've not any response to it.
So it could be reasonably said that most people are very happy enough with the policy as it stands.
I mean, there's certainly
feeling the need to write to us or complain or make their point of view.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else got any questions? I do have one. This is to do with, it's still done under common law, isn't it? Is it?
No, it's the licensing of 2003 and the current guidance.
So that's, so I'm thinking of the subcommittee here actually.
Oh, the licensing, yeah, licensing subcommittee is convened under common law, yes.
Oh, okay, that's what I mean. Okay. Is there any, or has there been any situations during recent pandemic where the pandemic rules or guidelines could have conflicted with the common law?
No, basically, no, there isn't. I mean, the only thing, if you wanted to desperately fish, would be whether or not some of the meetings could continue to be held remotely. But the fact that we hold them in person isn't detrimental. We don't have to hold them remotely. We have to hold some in person and some can be held remotely. We could hold them all in person and there's no damage. We couldn't hold them all remotely. Basically. And and I'm fishing to get something that we're doing with striking incompatibility.
Okay.
Because the coronavirus regulations 2020 just stamped over everything. It just said, if in doubt, read this one first.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you very much. So, next, we've got no other questions. Then we go to recommendations. The committee A considers the consultation report as in Appendix B and agrees review statement and licensing policy as attached at Appendix A and recommends to the full council that it be adopted and implemented with immediate effect. Are you all agree? Agree. Somebody coming in?
Councillor Van Dyke.
All right, Councillor Van Dyke.
apologies.
Please take a
Sat
seat.
now didn't take me anywhere near this place.
Yes, that's right.
Sorry.
Take a seat down there. Okay, the next one is item 8, page 91. Okay, and this is about taxi licensing policy. Before we start, is it likely that we'll have the reports on cameras in cars before the next committee meeting?
I think the next committee meeting is February. Yeah, so I mean, I hope that we can give some consideration to a CCTV report for the February. It might be a report that introduces it and then asks you what you'd like us to go and do with regards to CCTV.
At the same time, there's a full possible before waiting for the next one in February. I'm quite happy to, and I think politically, to accept a standalone meeting just to talk about CCTV cameras in cars. So if you can get it done, if it's at all possible to have it done before February.
I'd have to look, because obviously we put all these on to council to get approved, and then I need to implement the driver's side of it. So there is a little bit of work for us to do around that. So I can come back to you on that.
But it is possible to have an extraordinary
It is, we have to go through the monitoring officer,
Okay.
but it's something else that I can, we can discuss that.
I have a feeling it's something that's going to engage an awful lot of people who want to have a lot to say for last time anyway. So unfortunately it's not on this one. I was looking forward to it, Paul. I'll fill that down there. No pressure. Okay, so the next one is taxi licensing policy and the report by the land licensing manager.
Okay, so this report brings back the revised or the sort of the new taxi policy in relation to the response to the 2020 Department of Transport statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards. As I say, the report came to you earlier on in the year, and we've gone out to consultation, and so that consultation has included writing to all taxi, private hire, driver, vehicle operator licence holders, providing them with a link to access the report, the policy, and asking for comments in relation to that. Just Appendix B is the consultation responses. Again, we've not received very much response to the consultation. I mean, this effectively is bringing in the national standards to this authority. We operated fairly close to the national standards anyway, so it's not been a major change to this authority's licensed drivers, operators, vehicle owners in relation to this. There have been some changes, but there's been very little comment. There's two comments there. I think the biggest concern, and speaking with some of the drivers, they feel, some of the operators, it's very difficult at the moment to attract drivers to the profession. There's a lot of other opportunities now for drivers, delivery driving, etc., etc. And I think one of the things, I think that's probably reflected in comment 1, is the knowledge test that we have. They feel just one of those barriers to obtaining a licence with us. However, it is important that we do have a knowledge test. It sets a standard. There's a lot of authorities out there that don't, that are now bringing in knowledge tests, etc. And predominantly, when we look at why they're failing the knowledge test, it's generally because they can't answer the questions around the rules and the conditions and the law. The rest of it they seem to sort of sail through, but it's that one area which they should know about. This is relevant selection that they seem to fail on. But yeah, so the consultation response is there. The policy is the policy you considered previously. It's just been tidied up. Go back to consultation, and we'll bring it back to you with the responses. We haven't made any changes to the policy following the consultation responses. Unless you feel there's a need to do so. That's all I need to say, Chair.
Okay, any questions from the committee?
My question is still on the consultation, which has already been raised before. The only 2 licensees that responded. I was just wondering, is there anything we could do more to get more licensees involved in responding to this kind of
We used to have a fairly healthy trade association, Hackney Carriage Private Hire Trade Association within the borough. I'm going back a number of years, but we don't have a trade association anymore. There's not a group of drivers that sort of represent the rest of the trade. We've spoken internally about trying to sort of support the drivers to get them to sort of form again and get something going. But I think that would be one way we could engage better with them. But I mean, so we have made contact with email, sent letters, etc., to everybody, inviting them to do that. When we look at the statistics of the number of visits to the sites, there are lots of people going looking at the policy, etc., but we're not getting very many comments about it. So.
Do you send a reminder?
We haven't sent a reminder, no. It's
something we can look into.
but that's something we can consider for future sort of consultations.
Thank you.
Do the
Sorry.
Oh, thanks. You know, when you talk about the shortages of drivers, and you talk about that there are so many opportunities, and knowledge test is one of the obstacles you have. I'm wondering if criminal records is also affecting all those drivers as well.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily them having the criminal record. And we're very reliant on the DBS system to do the check. It's an enhanced check that we do, so it's quite a thorough check that they go through. Some of those checks we get back in a day. Some of those checks we get back in 6 to 12 weeks. It just depends on what's on their record, where they've lived. If they've lived in a number of policing authorities, the check can take longer. It's just the way it works. One of the things that does hold things up, especially at the moment, is if they've lived abroad for an extended period of time and they're required then to get a certificate of good conduct from the country where they resided. Some of those are taking an extraordinary time at the moment, but again, that's something that's out of our control, and we need to check that they are, safe to be a driver, etc. So it is important we carry out those checks.
And the certificate of conduct, how do they get it? Is it from friends or from families or from?
No, I mean the government quite helpfully put up within their web pages a list of all the places and how to make contact with various things. It's either via the embassies or police authorities, etc. It just depends on where they've gone. Generally through the embassy you can obtain something.
Yeah. Again, I like the idea of CCTV in the cars. In Thurrock, is it operational now? In Thurrock?
At the moment, if you have CCTV in your vehicle, then you need to comply with the conditions. It's basically making sure you manage that data correctly. We at the moment we aren't saying to drivers that you have to have CCTV. If we do, then we, the council, become the data controllers. There's a lot of things to consider around that. And that's what that next report will be. I think that report on its own will be a relatively contentious item and quite a heavy item. So a number of authorities have gone down the road of making it compulsory. I know some wish they hadn't, some are pleased that they did. So I think we've got to sort of think about considering that.
But it's not compulsory, right?
It's not compulsory within Thurrock, and it's not compulsory nationally. It's not, the national standard said you should consider it, and if you do make it, then you are the controller of the data.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Van Day, you wanted to say something?
But just do the Uber drivers need the same? Do they need to have the knowledge?
So Uber drivers, Uber is licensed by TfL. Right. TfL currently don't, as far as I'm aware, and I could be wrong on this, but as far as I'm aware, they don't have a knowledge test for their private hire drivers. Albeit under the new system, it's something that they will need to bring in. I know TfL have made a number of changes already to their driver licensing system. And hopefully these national standards will put everybody on the same level playing field. From that point of view. So I know what goes on in Essex because we have a lot of contact with licensing meetings, etc. But TfL are different to other parts of the country, but are changing.
Okay, Councillor Snell.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same sort of issue really, is that I'm quite pleased we're going to keep the knowledge test. Because, if you want to come and drive in Thurrock, surely you need to be invested in Thurrock and understand the area, understand the rules and regulations, number one. But I did recently have calls to take an internet-based taxi service who got completely caught out by an overnight roadworks that popped up local to me, and he didn't have the faintest idea where to go next, and I had to direct him myself. I was able to do that. I'm a big guy, and I've no worries with that. But if a young lady or something, an old person more vulnerable, that might be an issue for them, you know. So I think it's crucial that these guys know where to go should that sort of thing happen, and not just rely on the technology, because sometimes the technology fails. And when it does, that can cause a problem. So I'm pleased with that. I also like the fact that we're keeping some of the tougher regulations. Was it my imagination, or was some of the wording being tidied up to make it a little bit firmer in the wording? It seems to be more definite. There was a little bit of vagary sometimes in some of the wording.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't, and certainly things around the sort of the criminal convictions, etc. The national standards set out, you know, some really good sort of examples of things. We've also got the Institute of Licensing. They produce some model standard conditions, etc. as well. So we've combined those together, you know, along with what we had originally. Hopefully we've sort of got it, you know, in a more up-to-date version that is quite robust. And you know, we've learned from previous committees and previous, you know, appeals to magistrates courts, etc. Try and, you know, get it right, really.
Yeah, I think it's also good that if we're doing some kind of a national standard, if you like, if it's going to gel over the coming years, that you're not going to get drivers jump from sort of authority to authority. The chance there aren't, because they've been found in one authority, well, we'll go there. It's not quite strict. And I think as long as every driver knows where they stand from day one with every authority, it's got to be a good thing for us.
No, absolutely. And I think it's you know, Thurrock, you know, I wouldn't say we're perfect on everything, but we've been, you know, pretty good with our standards, with our knowledge checks, because we've had those for quite a while. There are things we've had to, you know, change, but there are a lot of authorities, and there are authorities within Essex that didn't have a knowledge test. You could walk in one day, as long as you got a DBS certificate, you walk out the same day with a driver's badge. So I think, you know, everyone else hopefully is raising their game, which will help us with driver recruitment, etc.
Okay, more questions? That's mine.
Not a question so much, but returning to this issue of CCTV in vehicles, I don't know what my view is on it, I'll be honest, but like you, I think it's something that should have an area, and I think we should look to debate this as soon as possible. So I'll make a recommendation by your lead chair that we are at least minutes that the committee would like to see a report forthcoming as soon as possible, or even make it a recommendation at C. I wouldn't want to put a timeline on it, but I think it should be recorded that we do, because it was February, I think we were first told that a report would be forthcoming, and here we are nearly in October.
6 months later,
still
nothing.
no idea when it's coming, no critical, but I think we should just now sort of record it that we would like to see that come forward for some kind of debate sooner rather than later. Before
the next one.
Yeah, and you know, if it's possible to do it before the next one, then we can certainly commit to have it at the next.
Well, let me put it this way. I think because of the contentiousness of the subject, and it has to be really thrashed out, because the last time we spoke about it took up a large chunk of our time. It should be a one-off, bespoke meeting, and thrash it out altogether. So I want everybody to have on this committee to have their say. I'll also add to that a similar thing for electric cars. We were looking at a 3-seat electric car. I was hoping we're going to be discussing that. So that's another bespoke thing. Whether the fact that we powered vehicles powered.
So yeah, so this policy, what we will do is to stitch in our existing vehicle policy into this, and it will be produced in one document. We will bring CCTV as a standalone item, and the vehicle policy. So you know, what vehicles we will or will not license.
Yeah, just because something's got a different way, different type of fuel running, shouldn't necessarily mean that the scrap licensing rules that governs all other things. They were put there for a reason, but I think it's one of those things that's we can't afford.
But yeah, our vehicle policy doesn't really look at sort of the green agenda at the moment. So
it's not just green, it's safety as well. I've got one question, and this is, I'm going to make it a generic question, because this is one that came up, and we had a different opinion, council still alike on a particular subject. Not necessarily means who was right or wrong, but there was someone that had an offence, so they still had a year or 7 years to run, and because of that we said, although you seem like a nice chap and all the rest of it, we're going to wait until the end of 7 years, which is another year or so's time. Does that mean that it automatically will be allowed necessarily less if another offence?
No, I mean, so the proposal is with the policy, contained within the policy, that we will apply this to all drivers, you know, from the moment it comes into a certain extent. And there are timeframes for varying degrees of that. But a driver that has got a criminal offence or conviction for something, if he now falls outside of our policy, then we will need to reconsider them, because
I think, yeah, I think what you're, I know the case you're on about. If Karen was convicted of shoplifting again, and so she lost her taxi licence, if she applied to you during the period of that conviction, i.e. before it's spent, the officers will bring it before subcommittee because they can't grant it automatically. If you refuse it and then the conviction is spent for the purposes of the guidance and she applies again, the officers will grant it without it coming before subcommittee because they meet the criteria. There are some offences which are never spent, the more serious offences, but the more minor the offence, the shorter term it is before it's considered spent for the guidance. And if officers can grant it at officer level because they tick all the boxes on the guidance, it'll come before you without you seeing it.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Another guy. Okay. Thank you very much. Anyone else got any questions?
In that issue.
Just a quick one, please, Councillor.
Yeah, you have your classified the minor offences and the major offences.
It's the guidance sets out.
Yeah.
The guidance denotes the policy the council sets, and the policy has innumerable offences in there, and scaled and graded, right down from, you know, sort of speeding is the lowest one.
And within the policy, I think it's on page 115 at the top, it does define, it gives some definition around what is a minor traffic offence.
Minor might be serious, but I mean, so, you know, 40 miles an hour in the 30 zone, subcommittee may look to say, you know, it's a one-off. The training they're not given, where, you know, someone's driving to get their wife who's in labour to hospital and is speeding, should not be viewed the same way as someone who is speeding through a residential zone with passengers on board their own taxi. And that's why you have subcommittee to decide whether or not they're fit and proper person.
Thank you.
And I say some offences are never considered spent for the purpose of the guidance, sexual offences in particular.
Okay. All right, so we come to the recommendations, and the committee considers the consultation response as in Appendix B and agrees the taxi licensing policy as attached at Appendix A and recommends to full council that it be adopted and implemented to come into effect on the date that is at least 2 months after the vote. All agreed? Agreed. And finally, the Gambling Act Statement of Principles, which is page 121. So, and I invite all Adams to introduce this.
Again, this is just the review of the Gambling Act policy. So under the Gambling Act 2005, this policy should be reviewed every 3 years. Again, we've reviewed the policy. There's been very little change to the policy. It's just updated it with sort of changes to sort of legislation, etc. We've gone out to consultation following consideration by ourselves at the last meeting, and with regards to responses, we've actually only received one response, and that was from GamCare, and it was a generic response. They're not responding particularly to our individual policy. They were just making general comments around, you know, how people can access their services, etc. And we do have links within our policy to the Gambling Commission's website that have all this information on it anyway. So, you know, I think we're fairly sort of linked in with the message that they're sending around that. So we haven't made any changes to the proposed policy from that. Gambling across Thurrock is quite a small proportion of the licensing work. It's just, you know, we've got a number of betting shops, we've got a family entertainment centre at the services, and the rest of it's, you know, sort of fruit machines within pubs, etc. So gambling is not a really big part of of the licensing.
I've just got a question. It's a really clear report, so I'm, as someone used to the committee, I was glad to see that. But can you explain why again this policy expired in 2009 or January 2019? Was it the same sort of reasons as the last one?
Yeah, I mean, apologies. I mean, most of the team we've been pretty much doing everything COVID, the enforcement of all COVID regulations, etc., etc. We've just not really had the capacity to sort of pick up on this, and we are playing catch up on that. But again, the gambling is a very small amount of time. In fact, in the last, I've just done the gambling return, we haven't had one application for gambling in the last 12 months. So we're not going to have any risk in relation to this. Bar another pandemic, we should be on top of that, and we shouldn't get to the point where we passed the review date moving forward.
Thank you.
Anyone got any legal questions? No, I don't. This is the last item on the agenda. I know someone's going to catch a train.
Oh, we've got 3 minutes here.
You sure?
Yes, of course, yes.
And ask lots and lots of questions. No one else asking any questions? I just want to just ask one question. Page 145, 21.0, bingo premises. Bingo defined in Annex A, entry to these premises is not generally age restricted, although certain areas may be restricted. Say not generally age restricted. Shouldn't there be?
No, I mean, you're going to test me now.
We've got some, it could go away.
I think it's certain venues in each.
Yeah, no, so
Bingo itself.
Playing of bingo isn't age restricted, so you can play that on the seafront, and the sort of machines there. When it says parts of it, because a lot of them now have got what they call adult gaming centres within the bingo establishment, so there's the areas where they've got sort of the high value fruit trees, so that those areas are restricted. So generally speaking, bingo is not age restricted, but there are some parts of the building that may be, as well as if they've got alcohol sales and things like that. So,
Okay.
I ask another question, but it's going back a few.
Council, make a legal one.
Well, no, it's not. I think it's a typo. But on page 131, 6.3, it says the other groups and people consulted were organisations working with who are problem.
problem gamblers.
Oh, right, okay.
Which page was that? And I'll make sure.
131. It's just, I was trying to understand what it meant, so that's
yes, it's people who work with problem gamblers.
Thanks.
Right. Anything else? So let's go on recommendations. Agenda item 9, that the committee agrees with the reviewed Gambling Act statement principles as attached to Appendix A and recommends to full council that it be adopted and integrated with immediate effect. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Right. Okay. Before we go, I'd also like to formally get this agreed that these two items that we mentioned, the CCTV in cars and for taxis, and also electric cars which don't carry 4 people or fall outside the carrying capacity of petrol or diesel cars. We should discuss that fully, and I think with a full licensing committee, and there'll be standalone meetings, one for these innovative cars and one for CCTV. I think they're too important to try and shoehorn into normal business.
Chair, sorry, can I just for clarity, you want 2 separate meetings, you don't want to have 2 reports on one evening?
Yeah, 2 bespoke. They're specific, they're different than the specific. And I think it's going to take a lot of time for us to discuss this and think about it. It will be quite involved. As we found out in February when we were just talking about CCTV cameras in cars, it started off as a simple, oh, that's a great idea. Then somebody said, oh, what about data protection? What about this and the data control? And all of a sudden everybody's got light bulbs on, and then we started talking. It's going to be the same again. And I don't want, and I want it thrashed out and sorted out in one meeting, unbespoke meeting for the CCTV, and also whether we change the licensing of alternatively powered cars, which are smaller than petrol or diesel cars.
I think, Chair, obviously with regards to the change of the vehicle specification, it would be useful to review, you know, all of the specification around the vehicle, because I think electric vehicles is just one element of something that needs to be reviewed. I think that can all be reviewed as one, but I think we ought to look at the vehicle policy as one, and then the CCTV as a separate agenda item or a separate meeting, whatever we feel.
I'm a little concerned that cars that are a little, say, novel might be allowed to fall outside the restrictions and the guidance of the Hackney carriage laws.
Yeah, I understand. I mean,
we can have, only a few of us actually saw this particular car. It'd be nice if we come back and show everybody else in the committee. I think that would be useful too.
I mean, to a certain extent, that, you know, we've addressed that individual application through the licensing subcommittee. But I think, you know, we do need to review the full policy.
Well, we've addressed it because we said we're going to send it to the full committee to discuss.
Yeah, I think, you know, that's the idea.
Yeah, I think what Paul's saying, Jay, is instead of just having a single report on electric vehicles, you have the vehicle policy as a whole, and which
Okay.
you discuss the electric vehicles within that.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to have a vehicle there that really starts the full process. Just asking.
I mean, it's potentially we could bring some vehicles along. As I say, I really would like to introduce, you know, to look at least look at emission standards and sort of green agenda as well around that.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, electric vehicles are just one part of that. It is quite a big thing to look at, and you know, it will take a little bit of effort to do it and to do it right. As I say, the reports will come. We definitely have a season for the report for the next meeting. I hope that we can have the
Before the next meeting.
by the next meeting.
Before.
Okay.
All right. 2 months before, we've had 6 months. Thank you. Yes,
Does the mayor's electric car have to be licensed? It's a bit like a taxi, isn't it?
No, it falls out because it's for him and not for them only.
It's electric fares,
I
isn't it?
don't know what it is.
Right. Okay, so we have a commitment on that then, yeah?
I've got a private application.
Thank you. All right, I'll now declare, unless there's anything else, any other business? I'll now declare this meeting closed. Thank you very much indeed.
When is next meeting, please?
Sorry?
Next meeting.
Next meeting's going to be February, unless we get a couple.